taking a C2 zone that the landowners are already using that piece of property and telling them that they got to use their property for a different use. I don't care what the plan says.
Yeah. And so the plan was adopted in 2003, and we haven't taken any action on that second implementation action, and we're not recommending to do so now. Other questions? Let me quickly go over some considerations.
I have just a quick question. If that's so, we're talking about, I mean, the whole header is consideration of the Weber County General Plan. Maybe we'll hear public comment regarding this. But if we're adhering to the plan, right there, it just said, why don't we take this from C2 to C1? I would be interested because I know that the two businesses out there, one's a convenience store, the other was a butcher.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be interested if there's public comment to address that. I mean, it's only been 15 years since the plan's been out there, but why are we not adhering to the plan in the last 15? Just a concern. Not a concern, a question.
Yeah, I think it's a valuable question, and for some reason we haven't pushed in that direction in the past.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I can go a little further. I think it's because we'd be rezoning an individual landowner, restricting rights that currently exist to that landowner. And I think it might be just...
I understand what Commissioner Ebert said. I just am trying to, I'm sorting through this my own, this
Right.
is just me.
Why does the plan say what it says if we're not willing to do it? That's a great question, and one that I've asked myself as I've read it.
Okay.
3 considerations, maybe even 4 considerations for possible action today. Number 1, just accept the Planning Commission's recommendation, rezone 15 of the 22 acres to C1. You have an ordinance in your packet that would execute that. Option number 2 is ask for an amendment to the ordinance that would allow it to go to C2. You can do that with a development agreement. You can do that without a development agreement. If you go without the development agreement, I strongly advise you to give us direction to also change the general plan. So we're actually making a decision that complies with the general plan. I would request that you give me a little bit of time to prepare options 2 and 3. So option 3 would be just go straight C2 with a general plan amendment. Option number 4 is deny the rezone request. This was option 2, development agreement. And so in your Planning Commission staff report, or the County Commission staff report, there was attached a Planning Commission staff report. In that staff report, you've got a draft development agreement that we started working on with the developer. We sat down, or with the landowner. We sat down with the landowner. We went over all the desired uses. We talked about development standards, including street-oriented commercial. He said, I don't want the whole 4712th Street to be taken up with buildings because they're not going to be able to see the sign or the grocery store. We said, okay, well, what about 50 or 60%? In our meeting with them verbally, it seemed like that was welcome. We talked about architectural standards. How about we give a tip of the hat to the agricultural uses that are in the area. Rather than a sea of asphalt and the standard split face CMU big box grocery store, maybe we can ask for something that looks a little bit more barn-like or agricultural-like so that it's not such an intrusion to the visual aesthetics, to the agricultural nature of the community. We asked for a little bit more green in the parking lots, trees and vegetation. We asked for dark sky lighting, similar to what they have in the Ogden Valley. Asked for pedestrian considerations, a pathway that goes around the property. We asked for a park. We said that the drainage detention facility could double as a park. That's in that development agreement that we started negotiating with the applicant. It's not completed, but it's pretty close. It could be executed in the next couple of weeks if you're comfortable with it. So that would be C2 with the development agreement, or you could just go C2, change the general plan, and execute that. I would ask a couple weeks to help fine-tune the language to change the general plan.
Okay, great. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Ewart before we open this up for public comment?
Well, I do.
Okay.
I see two 3A and a 3B. So on 3A, specifically, we're talking about amending the general plan. And 3B, we're talking about the specific zone. Is that correct? That's where I read that, Mr. Chair.
That is correct, and that's how it's listed. So there is a specific request for an amendment to the general plan.
Just want to make sure I understood it before we got into the action here.
There's actually, and just to reiterate, so that I'm clear, there are actually not 3, but 4 options here. One is that one the Planning Commission has brought forth with the 15 acres to go to C1, correct?
Correct.
Number 2 is C2 with restrictions, or amendment to, with a development agreement.
Correct.
Number 3 would be no restrictions, a C2 with no restrictions.
Mhm.
And the 4th one is to do nothing, or don't
Deny the applications.
deny the application.
Yep.
Okay.
And you are recommending
Um,
first one?
Well, the planning
acres
commission
of
is
the
recommending
C1.
the first one. Planning
Yeah,
commission.
when I
is
say you, you represent the planning
Yeah.
commission.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep.
Very good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner.
General plan clearly states, if you look at it, and it's the only area that I see in the general plan of a community village center, right? Basically a commercial base.
Right.
I guess, one concern from the commission standpoint is unincorporated Weber County pays into municipal services to support the services so that county-wide residents aren't paying for specific services within unincorporated. That tax rate is woefully low and is subsidized. Mostly because it would cost, the tax rate for those citizens would be so high, it's just unreasonable. The reason is because there's no commercial base. Right? We're just collecting property tax from the citizens out there with no commercial base, with no sales tax base, basically, and no vertical tax structure, which creates greater value. Much of that property is agricultural or, green. So at this point, from a county perspective, it would make tremendous sense for us to help the community have this village center or this commercial base. The question I have for you is, are we restricting or not using tools through zoning to help create this village center because we're restricting the use of it to a point where no one can really invest in it except for something that doesn't have the return or create the synergy around that intersection, which is the major intersection in West Weber, to actually create a village center. So those citizens have to drive all over the county trying to find those services.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Those are great considerations. And one thing you'll find in the Planning Commission staff report is a discussion about economics. It is true that you can get some pretty good, if you're comparing a tax base, you can compare how much you pull in on a linear frontage base. You've got 1 acre parcel at 150 feet of frontage versus, I don't know how many thousand feet of frontage that this commercial project would have. And primary primary occupancy, single-family dwellings are a net drain on county budgets. We know that. But commercial base is a net input. And so, I mean, if we're looking at an economic side of this, it's hard to argue any other way.
So basically, commercial space is taxed at 100% and residential is taxed at 50%, plus the value of a commercial space usually is net higher.
You've got you got the retail income coming from that as well.
Excuse me, Commissioner, residential space is a net drain. Will you just give us just the 2-second explanation on that?
Yeah, the requirement for the amount of services that go into providing for residential communities almost never comes up to the same value as what you're bringing in tax base for those communities. Whereas the requirement for services for commercial communities, you're spending less dollars to serve those areas in comparison to how much you're bringing in. So your return on investment is significantly higher with a commercial property.
I think the examples, if you look at Washington Terrace and Riverdale, I mean, that's the example right there. There's virtually no commercial in the terrace, and that community is struggling for dollars.
Right.
For infrastructure, and Riverdale is wholly commercial. Now, we don't want to turn, for those of you with the pitchforks. We don't want to turn West Weaver into Riverdale, but we do need to create, or help the community create a base there somewhere within the county. There's an possible industrial park at the other end of that community also that, may help with that. Anyway, just some thoughts.
We have talked a little bit with the applicant about possible community investments, including a park, a trail that wraps around the exterior of the 22-acre property, street trees, things that make the place beautiful, that people who live in the community can use as well. So it's not just a commercial base.
Any more questions for Mr. Ewert, commissioners? Mr. Ewert, if you'll stay, if you'll just kind of stand by, we'll call for questions here in a minute. Ernie, if you'll just make sure that this map and the first map that shows the property are available just as you're working. This map's fine, though. I think this map will be fine. We'll now move to item 4 on the agenda under item number H, which is for public comments. We ask for those of you who are here to weigh in on this. If you'll please come to the lectern, introduce yourself and your address, and then limit your comments to 3 minutes, please. We'll do that now.
Hi, I'm Tammy Baugh. My home residence is 4441 South, 4300 West. This is our property. We would like to bring some tax base to the community. We'd like to bring a grocery store. We'd like to bring a restaurant. We'd like to bring a hardware facility / farm store so that people that live out there and have farms like we do out there, that we don't have to go 5 miles to get grain, or we don't have to go, our kids that go to the high school out there don't have to drive so far to get a hamburger for lunch. We are just asking for the C2 so that we can have a drive-through restaurant, so we can have a bank, so we can have the big box stores to be able to drive the rest of the development. It's been mentioned that staff would like a 3 to 4 acre park. That isn't very economically feasible for us, maybe 1 or 2 acres to take care of the retention problem and allow a park. We do want to stay within the community feeling. We want this to look and feel like a part of the community. We want it to look like something that has always been there and give the population something that they would want. You would be surprised at the amount of people that would really like a dry cleaners. We can't even begin to have a dry cleaners with C1 something. So we would really optimally like the whole thing to be rezoned, the full 22 acres, to be rezoned C2 with the things that we put on our application with that community development in mind. We don't want a car dealership. We don't want anything like that there. That's not the opportunity that we want to. We don't want that there. So we would fight against that as probably harder than anyone else. But we want to see this to give the community and the county a base to be able to go to have the facilities that they need and the tax base to support themselves.
Thank you.
Commissioners, I know most of you don't know me. I'm Kerry Gibson from West Weber. I live at 5454 West, 1150 South in West Weber. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. Commissioner Ebert, I want to thank you for your comments about tax base and the Municipal Services Fund. If you'll allow me and remind me at the end of my comments, I have a comment about that, but I don't want to, believe it or not, I'm kind of nervous standing here, and And I want to get through some things that I had down, and then if you would like to remind me, I'll give you my opinion on that if you're interested. First of all, I wanted to specifically speak on behalf of a couple of individuals who asked me to mention their names here today. Laura Lee DiGiorgio, Leanne Morgan, and Valerie Hansen. Valerie in particular had prepared some written comments and was not able to come. She's actually in surgery right now getting a new hip, and asked me to make sure that you entered her comments into the record. The comments that she emailed to you yesterday apparently is the way that she described that. But they have asked me to bring forward a couple of comments, and I will do so now. But first of all, let me just share with you my experience. I have lived in this community my entire life. I actually served on the Western Weber Planning Commission years ago, 15 or so years ago, when this general plan was discussed and adopted. Shortly after that, I moved on and was elected to service in the legislature and resigned as a member of the Planning Commission. And somewhere around that time, there was significant discussion about how much, well, let me just back up. During the general plan process, there was significant discussion about how much commercial should be in this community and where. It was determined after, I believe, painstaking efforts that there should be no more than 15 acres of commercial in that area, and that it should be distributed equally among the four corners to the extent possible. For balance. In other words, they wanted it to look balanced on that intersection, not lopsided one side or the other. Including the corner which already has commercial on it of approximately 4 acres. Shortly thereafter, the current property owner purchased the property that's before us today and applied for a commercial rezone. It was decided unanimously at that time by the Planning Commission that I was not a part of, that such a proposal did not meet the spirit or the intent of the master plan as it was written. This was an important precedent and was reaffirmed several times throughout the several years in the absence of an updated general plan. So here we are again with a new Planning Commission, and in this particular case, when this was heard, what I considered to be some real challenges. First of all, the lack of attendance that particular day, but also...
Mr. Gibson, if you'll please wrap up here at 3 minutes.
Okay. Also...
Mr. Chair, I'd recommend we give him some extra time. He's representing 3 other people.
Okay, we'll do that.
Thank you. A new Planning Commission, additional new members, but it's the same request: rezone the entire parcel to commercial. And again, now the question becomes: does that meet the spirit and the intent of the current master plan? The community is very, very anxious to have their input as to how they want the community to look. And the only opportunity for them to do that is through the master plan process. It's the only opportunity. Once the master plan is changed and a property right is created, in my opinion, then the governing body is required to follow that guidance. And if a rezone request comes in that meets the intent of the master plan, it would be hard for a body to go against that without specific reasons. And so, in my opinion, they are anxious to weigh in. As you know, over the last year, you've had planning meetings out in that community, and at least the first one, and I think it dwindled towards the end, but there was quite a bit of interest in this, and they are anxious to determine this. I can just tell you that as I talk to people out there in the community right now, they are not aware that something like this could happen without a master plan, a major master plan revision. And they will be shocked and surprised and hurt and upset if a major rezone commercial happens in this area. This is a big deal in a small community like this. Plain City, for example, I spoke with a former mayor of Plain City, not this one, but another one that might be related to you, that said, we just really don't want a lot of commercial in our community because of all the things that come with it. We're okay being a bedroom community. I think our community feels that way by and large, but more importantly, what they value the most is the opportunity to weigh in through the master plan process. And I believe that's what they're looking for and seeking for in this particular case. And so when I look and I exert my opinion here, I think if I was the decision maker and if I was the person giving input to the decision makers today, I would say that according to Commissioner Ebert's question, this is maybe where I can address it or comment, I would support a larger amount of commercial in our community at some point than what we currently have on the books in the master plan. For a lot of those reasons, maybe it's the understanding that I have that's a little bit deeper than the average citizen of how the taxes are structured and how the municipal services fund is structured and the challenges that come along with that. But what I'm concerned about mostly today is the notion that a major rezone could take place outside of what I think is appropriate under the master plan and the precedent that has been set for 15 years as to what that master plan meant. And for that to happen without that community input would leave them completely out of this process. And so I look at it as kind of like the difference between the Constitution and the statute. We want to pass all the laws we can pass, but it has to be constitutional. And if it's not constitutional, okay, we can change the Constitution, but we got to think very carefully before we do that, because there's a reason why that guiding document is in place. So my plea to you, commissioners, is to respect the will of the people that was put forward in an adopted master plan. Give them the opportunity as quickly as possible to update that, because I do think that it's past time. Things have changed a lot in 15 years, and it's time for a review of that. It's not cheap, but it's not terribly expensive in the grand scheme of things. But give them the opportunity to weigh in as to how much commercial they would like in the area and where it should be and how it should look before we create a huge new property right for an individual that then can't be pulled back. Because, again, back to another question, Commissioner Ebert, if I may, maybe the difference between changing, or maybe this was Commissioner Harvey, between changing from a C2 to a C1, that may be the difference in my mind, is that downzoning, as Commissioner Ebert alluded to, downzoning is a totally different story. Once a property right is created through a zone, downzoning is much more difficult. And so if we take this step to rezone 15 or 20 acres, it doesn't come back. And so we ought to make sure that the community wants what, through the master plan, what they've asked for, and then create that. And I know that we may be in a hurry here, and I understand that, but let's not take the voice of the people away in this process. It's time for us to do a review. Let's do it quickly and do it right. Allow them to have their input and then rezone. If we're going to make a rezone today, my plea is to do it at a scale that's consistent with the master plan, which from my reading of it and from the precedent that's been set is no more than about 5 acres. I can live with that. If there's 5 acres allowed on each corner, I think that's a positive. That states the intent of what the master plan was intended to be in the first place. Thank you. Unless you have any questions, I hope I addressed what you were getting at, Commissioner.
Thank you. Mr. Gibson, thanks. I appreciate you taking a couple of questions. So you mentioned here equal, that this 14 acres is mentioned in the general plan is equally, as I can't find that. You said that, and I've tried to look at it, and I see this star on there, and that doesn't show it as equal, and I looked at other things. So you represent equal. How do you come up with that?
Well, I've seen 2 different maps, one with a star and one with more of a circle.
Well, either way, they both represent.
And so as previous bodies have tried to interpret what the master plan meant, there has been a healthy dose of trying to figure out what the map looked like and what the text actually said, and those merging together. I hope that is an appropriate statement. And I think that the precedent in the past has been the circle on the map showing showing that covering all four corners. And I will tell you that there are property owners who perceived it that way. I won't speak for any of them specifically, but I know that there are property owners who have felt all the way along that at some time in the future, they may not want to develop now, but at some time in the future, they would be entitled to a few acres of commercial on each of those four corners if they so chose. So I think you're correct in that I don't see a specific text that says equal, but that's the way that it has been interpreted, and I think mainly because of the map.
Who?
Well, by previous planning commissions when this proposal has come in the past, and that's why the rezones have not been granted in the past, and that's what's created the precedent that we're under today. So.
Okay, so when you say major, that's another word you use, is major. So you're talking about a major change to go from 14 to 15 acres, an acre.
No.
And you're basing that on the fact that it's not divided equally among the four corners.
I appreciate you asking these questions
Well, I want
because
to get down to the detail of this.
sometimes I don't even understand my own statements, so thank you. When I said major change, what I mean is that going from that expanding dramatically the amount of commercial in this community is a major change to the mentality of the individuals in that community. And so if they perceived 4 or 5 acres through the general plan, 4 or 5 acres on each corner, and they immediately saw 15 or 20 or 23 acres rezoned on one of those corners, I think that's a major change to what they expect and what they believed was the precedent set in the general plan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else like to address the commission with their thoughts?
Hold this guy to 3 minutes, please.
I'll certainly stand in 3 minutes. Kim Wheatley from East Huntsville. A very interesting thing has been happening over the past year where people from the western side of the county have been coming up to Ogden Valley to what we call our GEM committees. This is just a group of people that get together once a month, do what they can to understand what's going on in planning and to support the planning commissions. As you perhaps know, I'm a big fan of our planning commissions, both of them. And just last week, a fellow who's newly appointed to the Planning Commission, his name is Greg Bell, came. And what he was really interested in is how we went about encouraging the County Commission to update the general plan for Ogden Valley. What did it take? What was the process we went through? Because what they're starting to feel there is that their general plan is sort of being piecemeal, not picked apart, but it's just kind of out of date enough that there's bits and pieces now that they don't know what to do with. And it's just a perspective from the Planning Commission that they probably you don't have a chance to hear, but this is something that concerns them in the same way that ours was way out of date, and we're glad we have a new one now. I'm sure it would do them a lot of good out there as well. Thank you.
Before you walk, Mr. Chair, may I ask a question or two?
Yes.
So, Mr. Wheatley, you've spent a tremendous amount of time in planning on the GEM committee and other committees. I believe that was something that you did prior to this also. As we look at the map with the big pink star there at 47 and 900, it reminds me of an area, a commercial node in the Upper Valley, there at the four-way stop where the market is and the Maverick is. I see this kind of as a sister kin to that, so to speak, the zoning for this, creating a commercial node so that you don't have this spreading throughout the valley. And there's one location, kind of a village or community commercial center you can go to. And that size of a grocery store would probably be a good size for the Western Weber community. And small stores that also kind of dot around that node and draws folks to that node. And then kind of creates this understanding that businesses will only locate so far from another business because only so many people, you only drive so far for certain things. And so creating a commercial zone here actually accomplishes what the Western Weber folks want, which is one area for people to go and shop to, instead of spreading it all over and then everyone driving all over or having to drive in and out of the community. So that node concept that you've adopted in the Upper Valley, I think is a great concept for down here in the Lower Valley. And I think that's what they're trying to accomplish. But I don't know, would you mind commenting on the commercial nodes? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, we didn't have the concept of commercial nodes 15 years ago in our old plan, and this one either. But it involves more than commercial. If you recall, in the Ogden Valley General Plan, there's also the idea that some of our higher density will be around that. So it's more than just a commercial spot. It has to do with building a community around it. We had lots of hearings and lots of people involved, and lots of people have varying opinions on how this would work. But kind of the general idea, and I think it applies out there, is some sort of a center of a commercial. Kind of everybody gets the economic picture. I mean, very few people don't understand that. But sort of a commercial center that you can have some retail activity, feathering out to the heavy agriculture. So sort of a plan that can create a viable community, not intruding too much onto the people that are around. So there was a lot of give and take on that as it went in. And I think that's the reason that we do general plan updates. I know it costs $250,000 to probably do it. I think it was the best money that was ever spent on Ogden Valley since I've lived there for a couple of decades.
Anyone else from the audience like to address the commission? Please.
Okay, so I'm Marion Call. This is the reason I came. We own property at our address is 4270 West, 1150 South. We're just kitty corner from that property. Two things. My first question is, we've heard rumors about what this village consists of, and we don't really know for sure, but a couple of rumors that a lot of people have talked about is that this village is also going to house apartments on top. I don't know if that's true or not. I'd just like to know if that's the plan, that we've heard anywhere from 50 to 300 apartments will be included, kind of like what they've done over here by the Megaplex Theater. So I'd kind of like to know if that's in the plan or if it's just a rumor. The other thing I'd like to address, which is my concern, when we turn into our property on 1150 South, there are no turning lanes. And cars go fast on that. I know down further west where they widened the road for the county, there's turning lanes, but the state doesn't have any turning lanes on that road. And it's a busy road. And my concern is that bringing in a village with a grocery store and all these places for people to shop, the traffic is going to increase. And I personally am not against that coming in, but I look at it as a safety issue. Just last week, someone didn't see my blinker, almost rear-ended me, went around into the dirt on the side of the road and then back around. So my concern about that coming in is more of a safety issue, and would maybe like to see the state get involved and kind of widen that road out, which I feel needs to be done anyway. But that's my concern with that, is it's I just don't feel like that road is safe right now for the people who live on it in that area. And I'd like to see some conditions change before we bring more traffic into that area. Thank you.
Question? Go ahead. Thank you. So your property is on the northwest corner?
Right. Well, we're not right on the corner, we're the next space.
Oh, okay. So specifically, you didn't mention anything about this zone?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not real educated on all the zoning laws and changing the zone. I'm just, if the zoning goes into the C2, from what I understand, which means they can bring in a whole village, I'm just concerned about the zoning being changed for more traffic in that area, and I just don't feel like it's safe right now.
So this commercial village you're talking about, this is that's something that's up there in the air. This
Okay.
is some visions of different people. We're talking about just zoning today, just
Okay.
commercial business.
Also, Casey, and
So
I didn't really understand,
specifically,
so.
there's no apartments planned for that. Unless Dan is going to sell something, then they'd have to come and get another rezone. So today, specifically commercial,
Okay.
because I don't see a lot of members of the county here getting up. I mean, these that Carrie said are dying to comment today. I only see a couple here, and you're one of those. And so I'm
Okay.
anxious in hearing your comment.
As far as the zoning
The
goes,
the zone.
personally, we moved out to the county because we liked the openness and the county and the quiet, and I personally don't want to see it changed. I'd like to just see it stay exactly the way it is. I know that's not the case. I know it won't happen, but I love the, I grew up in the bottom of Roy, and I hate driving over there, and I hate seeing what happened there, and I know that's going to happen out in our area. I just hope it doesn't happen for
So that
20 more
specific
years.
piece of property we're talking about, would you be adverse to having some businesses on that?
Maybe one on a small acre of lot. I wouldn't want to see
Okay.
a lot of businesses come in. Mhm.
Any other comments? Thank you.
My name's Brandy Olson, and I live in that pink star. I live at 1319 South, 4600 West. I want you to consider doing nothing, just to not do any rezoning. 10 o'clock on a Tuesday is not a good time for a public hearing for the people in the community. I know that everyone got notices, and at one of the last meetings it was expanded to make sure that a larger population gets it. I think that a lot of the community would like to give input, and maybe even going back to making the changes to the general plan. That's how we, express that we don't want anything else. There's a Maverick, there's a Kent's in Plain City. The reason that most of us moved to West Weber was because we didn't want to be in the city. And I just ask that you consider that don't do anything. Do no rezoning, at least until you can get more of the public input. So. Plus, nobody wants to build it right next to the train. Unless you can get them to stop. Can you put that as a condition to stop blowing the horn? No.
They do have those things. The UP has those considerations, but I highly doubt. Living in Uinta, I'm very familiar with when the train goes.
I'm used to
And
the...
they've been going the train down Uinta a lot longer than they've been going out west.
I can get used to the train. I don't think I can get used to a big box grocery store and people. Thank you.
Any other comments before we close our public comment?
I'm Dan Baugh from West Haven. My wife and I own the property. They keep talking about public hearings and having more of them, but if you check with the planning staff, they've been out in West Weber for the last year or more doing just that. And everything that they've come up with is to have the commercial in that star area that we're talking about. They keep saying have a master plan and redo the master plan. But realistically, the planning staff has had quite a few meetings for the last several years to see where the people want it, and they've all chosen certain areas. That's the one they've chosen. To address this lady's thing about apartments or something, that was one of the things that staff had recommended, like they have on 24th Street where there's apartments above. We haven't chosen to go that way because we didn't feel that that would be something that the community would like. There's been people approach us and wanted to maybe put some condos or something on one portion of it, but that hasn't happened because the planning staff hasn't been really willing to work with anything like that. We're not trying to do big box stores. The biggest store that you're probably going to get out there is a 45,000 square foot store. Big box stores are 100,000 square feet.
What would you guess the size of the Kent store is out in Plain City? Is that
About 40,
about
45,000
about
square
same
feet.
size.
I haven't been to that one, but most of the others are just 40, 45,000 square feet. It's a community store, just like a Walmart community neighborhood store. Big box stores are 100, 120,000 square feet. They have multiple stuff. We don't want to do that. We want a small community grocery store. Most of the people will know Weinigers or Kent's or something like that. That's what we're looking for. We have plenty of, the state will probably have us, we've done the traffic study before, we may have to do it again. There'll probably be a turning lane for our side. I don't know where it'll be, but we've already had the approaches approved once. We'd have to redo them. I'm sure the state would want us to have a turning lane or make it wider over there. That would address some of the issues. We're trying to be facilitators of something. We've tried before we bought the property about 18 years ago, this piece of property was proposed commercial and has been forever. And then when they did the master plan, they limited what everybody could do. And we didn't participate in that because we didn't know what was going on, and that was our fault. But we're trying to facilitate something that needs to happen out there. Everybody we've talked to, the Rouseys, which are on the property, both property owners on the north, there's 4 corners. Kerry Gibson and his family owns a convenience store, which he forgot to mention, and that's one of the reasons he doesn't want anything to happen out there. The other 2 property owners want us to get the zoning. They want us to have all the acreage right now because they know once it starts, in another 10 or 20 years when they're ready to sell, then they're willing to go forward and move with that, and they want that to happen. We've talked to both those neighbors personally, and they would just soon give us the land right now or the opportunity to build all that thing. So we're asking for C2.
Excuse me, Mr. Ball, I'll ask that you wrap up. It's been
Okay. So I just appreciate it. We would like an opportunity. We've tried several times to come to the planning commission, and they never sent it to the county commissioners. They've always stopped us there. We've done it at least 2 or 3 times before, and there's just a few people who don't want any growth, and those are the people who've stopped everything all the way along. Thank you.
Thank you. Unless there's someone else who'd like to address the commission, none being recognized, we'll move on to item number 5, a request for a motion to adjourn the public hearing and reconvene a public meeting.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We'll now have action on those public hearings. Ernie, will you please go back to that map? Thank you.
Let me go to the other map.
Okay, the first map shows the piece of property. So it'll be earlier in Charlie's presentation, if I remember correctly. That's it? Go back one more? Or, well, yeah, that's good. That'll work. Does that work?
Well, or you can go back even one more.
That shows where, what the potential zoning. Commissioners, we have a,
Go back one more. Oh, one more yet. That one. So that's the one you recommend.
This is the one that's in the ordinance that's attached to your staff report, yes.
that's the one, the planning commission, Charlie. Sorry, but that's the one the planning commission has come back and said to us that they recommend. Is that correct?
Yeah, based on its compliance with the general plan.
I'm not going to ask for a staff recommendation in this time, but I would entertain, give either commissioner to ask if that's the case. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Mr. Ewert?
I've got a couple questions, Charlie. So I just want to clarify because there's some concerns about large commercial Riverdale type of traffic and impact. And we've had reference on several occasions to big box. Under a development agreement and a C2, could you, if you wanted to, put a big box in there?
Depends on what a big box is. We don't define that.
Anything over 50,000 square feet.
Under C2, I believe that's possible.
Okay,
We don't
so
have size limitations.
if we were to have a development agreement in there, could we put something in a development agreement to keep?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The draft development agreement attached to the Planning Commission staff report does that.
Okay. apartments that bring more density. Could we, not if they proposed, but because the Boss, really nice people, but they may at some point decide, you know what, we're ready to move to Wyoming and we're going to sell. So could apartments be put on that C2 without a development agreement?
Currently, no, not
Okay.
under the C2 zone.
Under a C2. So apartments, oh, go ahead.
That was one of my questions, so
It was a good
C2,
question, huh?
C2 does not allow for
Apartments.
high-density housing.
It doesn't allow for any residential with very limited exception, a night watchman for commercial occupation, or
Mary Ann, that
commercial.
answers your question.
Okay, many times we have the same issue with developments as they come in, whether they're commercial or residential. Traffic is a huge issue, lane widths, and all of those issues that accompany traffic. Would that be part of the development agreement to have safe corridors and egress and ingress into any facilities?
Yes.
So the question I then would have is, where Ms. Call lives across the street, there's a concern with increased traffic into commercial. Is there anything we can do, working with UDOT, to address across the street issues with higher traffic volumes?
You talked about turn lane in the center.
Something
Yes.
along those lines. Okay.
Absolutely. The improvements that, we can require improvements to be made if we know that there's going to be a harmful effect of the development. We could do that, whether that we do that through the rezone and development agreement, or we do that just with a conditional use permit or a subdivision. We can require improvements to the roadway, and the BOS seem to be aware of that.
So, sorry to jump in here, but improvements to the roadway would include active transportation.
Absolutely. Our current code requires curb, gutter, and sidewalk. The proposed development agreement you have here would ask for a 10-foot wide pathway.
Would ask for a 10-foot wide pathway in addition to the curb, gutter, and sidewalk.
In place of it.
Yeah, will you say that again?
Yeah, so the current code, when you go to subdivide a property, you are required to put curb, gutter, and sidewalk along the frontage of your property. You've got to improve the road width to that standard. And in some cases, if the road width isn't wide enough to meet the cross-section standard of whether it's UDOT or the county, needs a little bit more asphalt too. In place of sidewalk, if we execute a development agreement, we can waive sidewalk and ask for an asphalt pathway instead. And I think at this time, asphalt's less expensive than concrete. So.
Well, and again, I think we can get into the discussion on a development agreement, lengths of pathways, widths, I think would be specific to the development agreement. I want to go now to the master plan that has the big pink star on it. Could we go to that one, Fatima? Or Fatima Jr.
I'll go by whatever you call me, Ernie, Fatima. I'm okay.
So I guess the question I have specific to this is, I feel like, just looking at this, that a tremendous amount of work was put into this, looking at this Western Weber unincorporated as a whole. And it's very clear that the planners understood that this corridor intersection was going to be the center hub of this community. We have since then probably put $25 million into this corridor west of this location, and I would imagine that will continue on 47 and then east for the UDOT property as the corridor continues to grow. And so growth will happen in this area. What my concern is that we've identified this as the commercial hub, but then we put restrictions on it that will never allow it to happen. Basically making that BAW, am I saying that right? That BAW property worthless. Because no one's going to build a house next to it. That's the reality of it. And I've never heard in any economics class the concept of restricting a certain amount of commercial because it provides more equity to other individuals. I don't think that's how private markets work. I think private markets work on first come, first serve and investment. And so what my concern is that the community understands where it needs to go, but for whatever reason, there's been restrictions put on that where it will never happen. And how are we going to, how do we come to resolution on that at the end of the day? And I think that's why we're here. I think a development agreement can address about 98% of the concerns. We will have citizens that want to have tremendous amount of input into it, and I would suggest that part of that process is the developers that own property in these areas work with the community. Can we go to the very end? Did you have the pictures in the very end of your presentation?
The architectural standards?
The architectural
I don't
standards.
have that in this one.
So in our packets, there's a tremendous amount of architectural standards that the community would have input into. There's site design standards that I think the community would have input into. I would strongly suggest we do a C2 with a very strong development agreement and then work with the developers to make sure that the community has input into what their commercial node looks like at the end of the day. And I think there's value in that.
Mr. Grover, how many, you've been very good in the last several months doing public outreach and getting a lot of input from people. I know that I've attended all but one of those public outreaches. You've held many of them at West Weber Elementary. You've held them here. How many total have you held since beginning of X to X?
There's been about 5 of those meetings.
And when did you start doing those?
We started those about in February.
Can you comment, was this map that we're looking at right here, when was that map created?
This map was created back in 2003 with the original general plan.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Does it mirror, can you give us comments, how does this map look based on what was adopted September 2003, the general plan? How does it look, this map compared to what we learned from those 5 meetings with the people from in that area who came out and commented, and you had maps all over the wall and you consolidated and then updated them? How does that?
In all of those areas, there was talk about commercial in this area. A lot of the discussion, though, was geared more around residential, just because they've seen residential happen out in that area, and so most of it was focused around that. There was some discussion at this intersection about commercial, but not a lot of detail went into that.
The North Weber corridor, not North Davis, we're going to use Weber. The North Weber corridor is right now the talks about that as Legacy Highways continues through Davis County and will eventually come into Weber County. About what west is that?
Charlie, you know better than I on that one, but the community wanted it further out west, and UDOT has requested a little bit closer to this area.
I want to say it's around 6,200 or so.
6,300 is what I understand.
General plan, the county transportation plan shows it west of 6,700, just a block or so west of 6,700 west.
Okay, that answer. Thank you. I have seen plans or notions, and by the way, for the record, there has not even been an environmental study done in Weber County.
Right.
So any plan that road is going at 4,300 or 6,800 or whatever west that ends up being, there's not even been an environmental plan, so we really don't have any solid things on that so far. We know about where it's going to be in Davis County, but right now that gets close to the border, and I'm just using some talk there. I just find that to be another interesting comment. Can you tell me, sorry to have so many questions, commissioners, I'll yield here in a minute. The Upper Valley, there was talk, Mr. Wheatley, thanks for your comments, but there's a Maverick that's being built per square foot, the busiest Maverick in their whole franchise. That's all the Mavericks. That's the busiest Maverick up there of all of them. There's a grocery store across the street, and then there's some other little businesses. There's real estate around there. There's eateries. There's all kinds of things. What's that zone? That four corner intersection there?
That's CV3.
CV2.
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 Then That's considered in the general plan Newtown, Eden, and then over by the park is considered as Old Town.
Commercial Valley too, is that what the V's for?
Yes. We are looking at creating
Could we do a CW 1.5?
well, and a development agreement on a smaller scale acts as that. It kind of gives some special considerations for this area that goes above and beyond the regular zoning. And so the CV zone has some special regulations just specifically for the valley.
Very good. And, Commissioners, Valerie Hansen is the one that Mr. Gibson pointed to with regards to send an email, wanted it entered as part of the record, which I don't have any problem with. I talked with her last night. The one thing that she really liked was the idea of dark sky lighting. I thought that was interesting. But she wasn't necessarily for this development, but if something were to happen, the dark sky lighting, I find that interesting based on some of the discussion we've had in the past. To me, that's, again, when you're building new or doing 25% of a remodel, to put those lights is a no-brainer, and so it's really kind of a simple thing. Commissioners, you've answered the question with regards to, because I wanted to make sure that Ms. Olson had some of her questions with transparency and the hearings answered. We've talked about Ms. Call, we've talked about Mr. Gibson and others that made comments here. The restrictions, we've talked about turning lanes, active transportation, which for me, and to even look at me, you can tell I'm not necessarily the poster child for active transportation, but appreciate it. A limitation on the size of a square footage of what's considered a big box or a small box or a medium box type of a store. I was intrigued when you said 1.5. This commission has also, though, taken, I'm still a little, I'm still at odds, or I'm battling inside myself here, because we've got a planning commission that made a recommendation to us. But one of the things that, to me, is I've driven by that piece of property now for, especially with keen interest in the last 2 years. We've talked about doing other things as a county out there. But I'd never thought that would be the best thing to do county business necessarily out there. But I don't live there. I live in an area that was developed just like this 25 years ago. When the only business that was out there was Diane Cote. And even Granite Construction they gave up their property to move out west. Farm area, and the first time we drove by our place, I helped a guy pull a cow, birth a cow. That's where the little mini grocery store, Walmart grocery, it's not a big one, just a little grocery is, isn't it? Little Costa Vida and little Checker Auto Part and a little store. I mean, it's still a nice place to live, but it's not like the dirt road we went down, Country Road, when I first got there. So, interesting. A lot of stuff going through my mind on this. I think you're right. You're going to see development out there. I know that the county, this previous commission, has already put in more than $20 million to improve transportation going further west. We're about to put in another 10, with another 10 following that up to the year 2024. So we know we're encouraging better conditions moving west out that way. So commissioners, I'd be interested again from you on comments before I entertain a motion. You've said some things, Commissioner Ebert. Commissioner Jenkins, do you have any comments?
Pardon me. Got to clear my throat for to speak. Well, yes. As I look at this, I've been involved with zoning on a municipal level for years. And this isn't the first time I've been through this. In fact, I've done 2 general plans and master plans. And as you look into this, these are typical struggles that every community comes with. You know, it's like, where do we grow and when do we grow? But zoning does work on our master plan in Plain City. We took an area that we felt like could be appropriate, and we threw a circle around it, and we didn't put an acreage to it. But today, in that circle is the Kent store that they're all referencing, and the growth is taking place there. And everybody knew that that's where the growth was going to happen. And that's just like this star or this circle here. You can argue the size of it and what it'll be, but ultimately, when it comes to the community out there, that's where the growth commercial is going to be, is right there on that intersection. You say, well, why? Well, it's not just because the circle's there, it's because it makes sense. You know, that's the intersection of 2 roads, and they're 2 major roads. They're not little roads. The New County Road going west is a whopper, or the state road, and that's where the community is going to develop. So we can throw up all the roadblocks we want to, and we can slow it down for a while, but eventually, that's where it'll be.
Would you have any questions for Mr. Ewart or Mr. Grover? Either commissioner? Thank you, gentlemen. Commissioners, do any of you feel strongly one way or another to at least eliminate or to make a motion on the 4 considerations that are before us today?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, I'll hear a motion.
Are we still? Oh, thank you. I'll make a motion that we exit the public hearing and enter back into our public meeting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second, but I thought we did that.
We can do it again.
Excuse me? Excuse me?
I agree.
Could you say that one more time? Because I never hear that much at home. So I'm right?
Or here.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. Oh, I'm just teasing. Okay, so we have a motion second. We'll do it again. All in favor? Aye. So let's go again. We're to now the action on the public hearings, item number 6. Thank you. And so Commissioner Ebert, you were going to make a motion. Go ahead.
Well, I'll make a motion that we amend the zone map to rezone approximately 22 acres from A1 to C2 with a development agreement at approximately 4311 West, 1200 South. And if I may add, part of that motion is that staff is directed to work directly with the developer, the planning commission, and the community on that development agreement.
That would be an ordinance, number 14.
I have a motion. Is there a second? Then I'm going to entertain another motion from you, Mr. Jenkins.
Well, I'd make a motion that we amend our master plan and approve what the planning commission has given us there, 14 acres, C1.
It was 15 acres, actually. Is that
Was it?
correct, Mr.
Okay.
Ewart?
Yeah, 15. I have it written here. It's 15. I'm sorry. I just said it wrong.
I have a motion to go to a C1 with 15 acres. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to go to a C1 for 15 acres. Is there any other discussion? Commissioners, in my box, before I call for the vote, I'm going to exercise a little bit of chair here.
Talk us to death.
Yeah, if that's what it takes. I've written down 4 options to take. A C2 with no restrictions. Nothing, to do nothing. I have a motion of C1 with 15 acres, and before that, with a second, and a motion for a C2 with restrictions. Both of those to me are in the center. We're getting very close to this C1.5 that you're talking about, Charlie. I hate to see the acreage, while I understand where you're going with this, commissioners, this is an odd-shaped piece of property. We're going to leave a piece of property that's 4 acres. It's very odd-shaped. It's not really farmable. You can't really do anything with. I'm uncomfortable with that. So, I guess if one of you, I'm going to call for the vote then, because that way I have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any other discussion?
So you talked about the fact that you're uncomfortable with this. So are you hinting to the fact that if we're going to make it a C1, we ought to go the whole piece of property?
Well, we've already talked about changing. The other big question at hand, as I understand it, is we have to amend the master plan in the first place. We're amending the master plan by going to 15 acres, because the plan says 7 to 14 acres. So you're right, we're amending the master plan, going to 15 acres. If we're going to amend the master plan, because this piece of property is so unique, I'd like to incorporate that so that he can do some kind of water storage or whatever on the property. It is restrictive. I personally think that if a guy's going to develop some property, he has a little more ability to do more with his what property he wants. But I'm pliable either way.
Question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So Charlie, does the C1 allow, I mean, again, my concern is that the community wants to have a commercial node there, but the planning commission has put barriers in front of developers to actually accomplish that. So I think we can make it 1,000 acres. But if we put it in a zone that no developer is going to put anything in there, then we could make it 1/4 of an acre and it's going to accomplish the exact same thing. So does the C1 allow for that commercial node to start?
It wouldn't allow for the grocery store, the drive-through restaurant that the
So
applicant's asking
everything
for.
that members of the community have been calling is saying, listen, why don't we have anything out here in this community, will continue to not happen by making it a C1 instead of a C2.
Oh, I apologize. You know what? Grocery store, I apologize. Grocery store is permitted there.
In a C1?
In a C1, yep. Sorry about that. Grocery store is permitted there. It's the farm store, the hardware store that wouldn't be permitted there.
Okay.
A restaurant is not permitted?
Drive-through restaurant would not be, but other types of restaurants would be. We may be able to take, we've got antiquated language in the ordinance. We call it drive-in restaurants there. We're not quite sure if that's the same thing as a drive-through or the old roller skater, hop and bop, or whatever that was. And so we have to kind of make an interpretation of what that is.
Hold on, let's go to the expert. What is a hop and bop?
I'm sorry. Really, okay. So, am I hinting, to answer your question, Commissioner? I am hinting that if we're already gonna be outside the thing, if we're gonna do it, we might as well go the whole way. So, my question, I guess I could call for the vote, or ask for that vote to, or ask for that to be amended.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Point of clarification. There is a section, or there is language in the general plan that says 15 acres. It conflicts with itself. It says 7 to 14, and another place it says 15. So you don't...
I read 7 to 14 all through the general plan as I stayed up late studying this son of a gun.
So there is a part that says 15. I can find it and point it out to you. So you wouldn't need to amend that, and that was the Planning Commission's recommendation. There wouldn't need to be an amendment to the general plan if you went that direction.
Sure enough.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, the reason I made this motion is I'm trying to split the baby here a little. You know, I had conversations with those who opposed, and they said, well, partial, 3, 4, 5 acres would be bad, and others say, you know, so when the Planning Commission comes forward with 15, I feel pretty comfortable with that because it kind of, like I say, splits the baby here a little. Let's both sides be happy with what they're getting.
My only concern with that, Commissioner, and I don't mind splitting the baby if we need to, But we've got a property owner that has an investment in a piece of property, and we're basically cutting a quarter or a third of that value of that property.
Yeah.
Where he or she could move a project forward, but we've lopped off a big section of it. And so, again, I can be swayed both ways. I'm just looking at, in my mind conceptually, I understand the concerns of the community, and I think that's why the community pushed the node to that location on purpose, thinking that that's where our commercial growth would be. That's where I can go do my grocery shopping. That's where I can go buy my lumber. That's where I can go to, a nice restaurant with my family, but I can still live in the community because that is where it will all be. But then the Planning Commission overlaid all these restrictions on it that doesn't allow that to happen. And now we have a Planning Commission, just like we have a Supreme Court, that will give differential to a decision that probably may not be the best decision that was made 18 years ago or 10 years ago or 6 years ago, depending. So that's my only concern is that the community has asked us to split a baby. I don't know if anybody's read the Bible, but we don't split babies. We try not to split babies.
It never actually happened, did it?
And so we've been tasked with trying to figure out how we can help the community to have their commercial, amenity, but still keep the agricultural feel. And we have all these rules that have been overlaid that don't make an iota of sense for that location. And so I agree, as Commissioner Jenkins was saying, it's hard to go against the general plan and the Planning Commission, but I think they're just given differential decision making, and we're being asked to make a difficult decision. I'm willing to make the difficult decision, and I think the community, the same community that struggled with that 12th Street project, I think is now seeing the value of that 12th Street project, that, there is some amenities that have been provided by that project, and I think they'll see the same in this commercial node if we do it correctly. The worst thing that we can do is do it poorly. And then you end up with build out there in that location that you can never get back. Because once you build the wrong thing there, it's there for 20 years. And then what will happen is your grocery store is going to end up somewhere else. And now you're going to have two commercial nodes, and you're going to accomplish exactly what you were trying not to accomplish, which is creating more growth in your community instead of having a one location that's well planned.
Commissioners, we've got a motion and a second on the floor for 15 of the 22 acres. If we go ahead and there's a motion and a second, if this is approved, what's the other 7 acres? Or what's the other 7 acres going to look like in 5 or 10 or 15 years? Are we being responsible? So I think you're hearing what I'd like to do. This is a compromise for me, based on a lot of the conversations I've had in the last 24 hours. So, but I don't think it's wise for us, if we're going to compromise on, if we're going to support the Planning Commission with 15, I think because of the uniqueness of this property, I think it would be bad for us to not go to the 22. That's my feeling. The whole piece, because it's, what are you going to have another turn in off the 12th Street to go into a pie-shaped piece of property? It just doesn't make sense to me, especially at 50 miles an hour. I think you get them off the road on a safe turning lane, you get them off the road and into the development. And, but I'm no planner. I mean, I'm just that. They made different intersections out our ways that makes sense. We've got a couple of ways in and out that makes sense, and I can't even speak to the number of acreage, but it's a little more than this. And there's some odd shaped pieces, but they've done things with them. Put a bank in, or they could do miraculous things with odd shaped pieces. I'm only using my experience. Mr. Crockett, I've got a motion in a second. Do I call for the vote? Is that how I do it?
So go ahead.
Commissioner, are you comfortable where you're at?
I think he's talking to you.
Yeah, I think he's talking to me too.
Jeremy, make a friendly amendment.
Can he make a friendly amendment, Mr. Crockett?
The rules of procedure allow for a motion to amend. If a member wants to change a basic motion, he or she would have to motion to amend it. Example of a motion to amend might be, I move that we amend the motion to include the changes we discussed to the ordinance.
Okay?
May I make a friendly amendment?
Yes.
Well, I'm not asking you, I'm asking the person.
Yeah. So why don't you get your mic so we can hear you?
I don't want anybody to hear me. May I make a friendly amendment that we amend it from 15 to the 22 acres so that the whole parcel is included in the C1?
I have an amendment to your motion.
Yes, that's a motion, so vote on it.
Okay.
And commissioners, it just as something to consider as you look at that, if you're going to be expanding the acreage and amending the general plan, an ordinance hasn't been drafted as to that yet, and a development agreement hasn't been drafted yet for you to consider. My recommendation would be to hold off until those things can actually happen.
Is it a requirement? I mean, I hate to go against you because I love you and think you're amazing, but I think we need to give some concrete direction to staff and to the developer, and we can, if we pass it, then we can do the ordinance, and then we can start working on the development agreement, because in my opinion, the development agreement is going to be a long, arduous process with our planning commission, with staff, with the developer, and then sprinkled in there the community, or maybe the community is a whole thing, in drafting what this development agreement looks like. So that would put us, you know, way down the road, I think.
I would probably ask staff what they think their turnaround time would be.
I have a different point of clarification before I answer that question. Apologize.
We
Mr.
have-
Chairman.
A development agreement. How
So-
long is it going to take to have a development agreement with all the parties that we want to be involved with this?
Just rezoning to C1 wouldn't include a development agreement unless you specifically asked for
Right,
it.
yeah, we didn't take.
Right.
Sorry, we didn't take my motion, sorry. I'm a loser.
So if we have a motion that was second, then we have an amended motion.
So you would vote on the amended motion.
Does he need to second that amended motion?
I think you just have to accept it.
No, I think all he's got to do is vote, second it.
Okay.
I think this is second. Robert's rules we're back to now, not legislative.
It requires the person making the original motion.
To accept it? Well, sure, I don't want to accept it.
Okay. So we have, so you don't want to accept the amended motion. We have a motion and a second on the floor. But then you make an amended motion.
So you're back to your original motion, which you can continue discussion for as long as you want. Once the chair has determined that you finished,
so-
you will restate the motion.
That's right,
and
so I'm gonna do away with my motion, I'm gonna rescind it, so we can start over, see if there's other things happening.
Okay.
Okay, so I withdraw my motion.
So we withdraw the motion.
So I'll make a motion that we adopt the C2 with the development agreement. That's the one I like. You don't have to second it, or someone else can make a motion.
Is there a second?
Yes, sir.
You can make a motion if you'd like.
No, there's no second, so that motion dies. I'll make a motion that we adopt a C1 with all 22 acres being included.
I will second that. Are you making a motion for a C1 with all of the acreage in the C1?
Yes. Yes. Okay, I have a motion and a second. I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor? It's a resolution? Sorry, number 14. Is it a
It's an ordinance.
ordinance?
Commissioner Ebert?
Aye.
Commissioner Jenkins?
No.
And Chair Harvey?
Aye. So that ordinance number 14 carries. Okay, Commissioners. Item number I, Commissioner comments.
Sorry, there was another item to make a motion on.
Thank you, sorry. There is another item. I'll entertain a motion, which will be item number IH2 on that deal. Item number H2.
I'm not making any more motions because I keep getting denied.
I'll make a motion on number H2. The motion on H2 would be that we rezone that over to A2, but I don't want to do anything with that half acre because that person that we sent the notices to hasn't responded. I don't want to shove that down their throat. I think that's a little disingenuous.
So I'd make a motion that we approve that.
You like that idea?
Yeah, no, not yours. I like what they've appointed here, and they've sent them.
So that's a substitute motion.
Right.
Is there a...
Well, of course, you didn't get a second yours.
Well, I didn't ask for it yet.
Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's great. Do I have a second on my motion? Seeing none, my motion dies. I'll entertain a substitute
I'd make a motion that we approve, what's the resolution number on that, Fatima?
15.
15.
It's ordinance.
As presented, Commissioner.
As presented?
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Fatima, I'll call for the vote.
Commissioner Ebert?
Aye.
And Commissioner Jenkins?
Aye.
And Chair Harvey?
Nay. Okay.
Commissioner.
Anything else you got,
Mr.
Charlie?
Chairman, yeah, one more point of clarification. There was one more item to make a motion on, and that is the amendment to the general plan, which the Planning Commission recommended against it.
Planning Commission recommended against amending the
Amending
general plan. Okay, so we have to make a motion to amend the general plan.
So moved.
Or to not, to deny it.
So I have a motion to amend the general plan. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Question, if we don't second this, then the previous motion dies anyway, right?
It's a specific item, so it needs a motion one way or the other, thumbs up or thumbs down.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it wouldn't undo the previous motion. It would just be it'd be in contradiction to the general plan.
Is that right, Charlie?
Yeah.
So,
I'd second it.
so question, are we going to discussion?
We can go into discussion, sure.
So here's my problem. We won't change this to C2, and we were hesitant to change it originally from 3 acres on each corner to 15 acres total to 22 because when it gets a general plan. But we have 2 pieces of property out there that are deemed C2 today. We want to turn this to C2, but we'll leave those both C2 even though they're against the general plan. That's my frustration with what's going on with the general plan. The general plan's not even being followed, but the Planning Commission won't follow the general plan, but won't go against the general plan to make this C2. I don't want to say getting on this record because there's only 5 people here and there's only 2 people watching, so it really doesn't matter. But I'm confused by this because are they going by the general plan and the Planning Commission or aren't they? And why are they holding to the iron rod here on the C2 when they're not even imposing the recommendations that were made 18 years ago?
The reason why they didn't include those because they weren't part of the petition, and so they were just looking at what was part of the petition.
Yeah, I understand that, Rick,
But
but they see it sitting there.
Yeah.
They just ignore it.
They could have.
Yeah, that's what my point is. They're cherry picking what they're choosing, and my comment is there's some motivation here why some of this stuff is happening. And that's what my problem is with this deal. Okay? Thank you.
I have a motion and a second to amend the general plan. Is that, it's not a roll call vote, is it, Fatima?
I would go
I don't
ahead
think it
and
would
do
be
a
no.
roll call vote.
No, hold on now. I want to question this.
It would be a
So
resolution.
this amend the general plan, we're not taking a C2 and making it a C1. We're taking the C1 and incorporating it into it.
What we're doing is we're taking it out of agricultural,
Right,
putting it into a C.
right.
If
The ball property.
I may be confused on what the motion is. Is the motion to amend the general plan to reflect the motion that was just made on the rezone.
Well, here's the issue, and I think Commissioner Harvey brought it up and Commissioner Jenkins brought it up. What exactly is the general plan saying? Is it saying that there can only be 15 acres on that corner?
It's saying no more than 15 at that intersection.
At that intersection. So we would need to amend the general plan because we're going to 22 out of 15. That would be the amendment to the general plan.
If you want the motion for that rezone to comply with the general plan.
You know, and I don't mean to belabor this, but we've already got some commercial development at that intersection, which encompasses X amount of acres. So there's already, by some definition, there's already commercial development at that intersection, so we really couldn't do 15 anyway. The recommendation is it doesn't work because there's already commercial development in the intersection, depending on what definition you use.
Sorry, the plan says new commercial. That commercial existed at the time.
What is new? What is new?
Something not old.
In my lifetime, that's kind of new.
So I'll second the motion.
Well, you made the no, wait, hold on. You made the thing on that.
Call
You made-
call the question.
That's better said. I'm going to call the question, and I'd like it to be a roll call vote. Thank you.
Commissioner Jenkins. And Chair Harvey.
Aye. So that carries, and we've got it now. That satisfies you, Chris. We're all good, and if there's any question on what that is. Very good.
Thank you.
Extra comments are the next item on the agenda. Charlie, unless you've got something else, thanks for keeping us straight. Commissioner comments on item number I. Thank you. Anything, Commissioner Jenkins? Anything, Commissioner Ebert?
I've talked enough.
Okay, and then item J, I'll entertain a motion.
Adjourn.
Got a motion and a second. We stand adjourned.